If you want to get better and more consistent results for filming S-Log3 on the Sony FX30, then today's video is for you. I'm going to show you a few simple tools and tricks for filming in S-Log3 that will help you nail exposure every time, even if you're filming fast-paced, run-and-gun, documentary-style projects like I am. And the best part is that all of these tools and tricks are built right into the FX30 already, so you don't need to go out and buy an external monitor or some fancy LUT to get started. All right, let's get into it. If you're new to the channel, my name is Riley, and I'm a filmmaker who's produced documentaries on multiple continents around the world using the gear that I talk about on this channel. So, if you're someone who's into making documentaries or films with small crews, then you're in the right place. Consider subscribing and following along. All right, back to the video. Much like learning to pull your own shot of espresso, approaching a new log profile can definitely be a bit overwhelming. You might be learning a new machine and there's a lot of buttons and bells and whistles and you're trying to figure everything out and it can feel kind of complicated and overwhelming. But much like this craft roasted coffee here, I think it's definitely worth it over something like a Keurig. The added flexibility of S-Log3 with just maximum dynamic range and not having color and contrast baked into the image, I think is going to give you the best experience. And much like learning to make your own coffee compared to going to Starbucks or using something like a Keurig, using S-Log3, I think, is going to give you the best experience, and even if it's slightly less convenient, it's definitely worth it. S-Log3 is definitely going to give you the most amount of control and flexibility when it comes to your image. It's going to maximize dynamic range, and it's also going to be the flattest picture profile compared to the other options that you have on your FX30. Now, in my opinion, this is definitely a good thing because that extra information means more creative control for you. The contrast and color decisions are not baked into the image. And so you as the filmmaker have the ability to add the contrast back in as you see fit and push and pull the color to meet the needs of your shot and your story. Now, right off the bat, I want to let you know that I am going to be in the flexible ISO mode on the FX30. I think it's definitely the most approachable when you're shooting in log compared to Cine EI. It's gonna give you the ability to change your ISO if you wish. However, I always try my best to shoot at one of the two base ISOs of either 800 or 2500. This is gonna give you the best performance when it comes to using S-Log3, both in terms of the noise and also the dynamic range. The first thing that I'm gonna recommend that you do is to actually use the pre-programmed LUT that comes with the FX30. Now, one of the nice features that the FX30 has, along with a lot of Sony's other pro and high-end cameras, and it's just a feature that a lot of other pro cameras offer in general, is to use a LUT on the monitor that comes with the camera. Now, this LUT is basically a preset that is going to convert your flat picture profile of S-Log3, and it's going to convert it to Rec. 709, which is the standard viewing profile that most TVs and displays are going to project in. Now, what's really nice is that Sony's FX30 comes pre-programmed with this camera. So here's how you enable it. You're just gonna scroll down and click on the display LUT. Make sure that's turned on. And then the next tab right above that is where you can select the LUT. Now just select S709. This is gonna be Sony's Rec. 709 LUT, and it's actually gonna match the free LUT that is on Sony's website. Now, there are some other LUTs available, including user installable LUTs. So if you have a LUT that you really like, you can use that and monitor yourself with the profile that you choose. But for now, let's choose the Sony standard S709 LUT. Now, this LUT is a pretty safe LUT in terms of what you see is what you get. So what it looks like on the back of your camera, if you're using Sony's free S-Log3 to Rec. 709 LUT that's available on their website, and I'll have a link to it down in the description below. What it looks like on the back of your camera monitor is going to be pretty close to what it looks like if you decide to use that LUT when you're color grading in the future in post. The reason why I say using this LUT is the first step to getting good exposure is because it's helpful to know what your image is going to look like when you have kind of a general sense of having some contrast and saturation added back into the image. It's going to give you a relatively straightforward readout of what your lighting looks like, what your exposure looks like. And if it looks too dark on the back of this image, there's a decent chance it's too dark. If you can't see your subject on this, then you're not gonna be able to see your subject in real life. Now, the next thing we're gonna set up is a built-in exposure tool on this camera, and it's actually the Zebra tool. Now, if you're not familiar with zebras, basically what this is it's an exposure tool to where you can set a given range on the camera, and then when the camera sees something in that range, it's gonna ping it with a zebra stripe. And so if you think about your exposure on a scale of 0 to 100, 0 being absolute black and 100 being absolute white, wherever you set your zebras within that range, your camera is gonna look for something in that range, and then it's gonna show a zebra stripe pattern when it sees something on an exposure scale of 0 to 100. Now, one important thing to note on the FX30 and on the Sony cameras in general that shoot in S-Log3, 100 is not absolute white. Absolute white is actually going to be at 94. So if you wanted to set your zebras to show you what is clipping, I would actually set it to 94 plus. But figuring out what is clipping in the image is not where I'm going to suggest you start. I actually think that we should start with skin tones. Now, skin tones, I think, are the basic building block of exposure and color grading. And this is because we often are telling stories about people. And so if we can expose our subjects correctly, it doesn't always matter as much if the background is like a stop or two too bright or a stop or two too dark. That's a lot more forgivable than if our subject is totally underexposed or overexposed and the shot just looks really bad in those cases. So using zebras to try to identify where skin tone should be is going to give us the best success the majority of the time when it comes to exposing them in our S-Log3 images. Now, one important thing to note about S-Log3 is that Sony is cramming in 13 or 14 stops of dynamic range into this image. And so they've had to squeeze a ton of information into a picture profile that is viewable on a standard dynamic range monitor. It's why it's so flat and you have to add the contrast back in. Now, in order to do this, Sony has actually set middle gray, so halfway between absolute white and absolute black. They've set middle gray not at 50 where you would expect it to be, they've actually set it to be at 41. Now, the reason why I point this out about middle gray and judging exposure with it is because it's actually a close approximation of where skin tones fall. And depending on the complexion of your subject, your skin tones are probably gonna either be at or slightly above middle gray. So my recommendation and the way that I have personally set it up is to set the zebra value to be at or around 48 and then add a plus or minus range of about 4 or 5. And so what this means is that if you set your zebras to 48 and then you do a plus or minus of 4, anything that falls within the 44 to 52 range on your IRE value, which is going to be about a stop or two above middle gray, the camera is going to ping that and show you that with a zebra pattern. And in my experience, this has been the best way for me to be able to set it up and to be able to get decent skin tones pretty consistently with the types of shoots that I'm doing. If this type of deep dive explainer into the FX30 is something that interests you, then I would encourage you to check out my course that I released on the FX30 called Getting the Most Out of Your FX30. In this course, there's over 2 hours of content and 19 different video modules on topics like this on exposure, Cine EI, S&Q mode, and how to set up your camera for run and gun filmmaking, including lots of others. This course is going to help you get the absolute most out of this camera and be comfortable using it in fast-paced run and gun environments. I've priced this course at under $40 to keep it affordable, and you can find the link to it in the description below. It's also important to note that the FX30 has 10-bit color built into the camera. And because of this, I don't think that it's necessary to expose to the right. Now, if you're unfamiliar, what this means is it's advice that you'll often see online where you should overexpose your image and everything in it by a stop or two so that you can bring it down in post later, and that's gonna prevent your image from looking noisy. Essentially what you're doing is you're sacrificing information in the highlights in order to protect the shadows, and then when you bring the image down in post, your shadows are cleaner. Now, this is definitely like a decent approach if you're trying to have really clean shadows in your image. But what I'm trying to get at is that the FX30 is a relatively clean image if you're shooting at one of the base ISOs of 800 and 2500 and you're not having to lift your shadows in post. And so for these reasons, I think that the range that I gave you for setting your zebras is a good one to start out with. You can obviously make adjustments as you get more and more comfortable, but I think that that range is a good one to start out at. Now, using Sony's built-in monitoring LUT on this camera and using your zebras properly are the only two pieces of advice that I have for you, because I really do think that shooting and exposing S-Log3 can be that simple. It obviously is going to take some practice, and I think that really once you expose and shoot properly, it's going to make your color grading process a whole lot more simple. Now, the color grading process on a flat image like S-Log3 can definitely be overwhelming as well, and that probably is a separate video for a separate day. But in general, I would say find a decent LUT that is not going to be too wild and crazy with the kind of creative look that it's going to add. Use something simple like Sony's Free LUT. Alistair Chapman makes some good LUTs. The Phantom LUTs are fantastic and easy to color grade, and James Miller makes some fun creative LUTs as well. I'll leave the links to those LUTs in the description below. But once you get good at exposing, it's gonna make color grading a whole lot easier. And I think with a little bit of practice, you are gonna get good and comfortable with shooting and color grading S-Log3. All right, good luck shooting, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.